"Who told you to take care of my daughter?" the king asked. "She was abandoned," the maid replied. "Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from." The palace gardens lay in a rare silence, the kind that belonged only to the earliest hour. Elise Moreau hurried along the gravel path, her apron still damp from the morning's washing, when a faint sound made her pause. It was small, fragile, almost swallowed by the rustle of leaves. She followed it without thinking, drawn by a trembling cry that did not belong in a royal garden at dawn. When she turned the corner, she froze. There, beneath the bare branches of a trimmed yew, sat the youngest princess of France, little Aveline, shivering on the cold stone ground. Her tiny hands clutched the edge of her cloak. Tears streaked her flushed cheeks. No nursemaid, no governess, no attendant stood nearby. The sight was so wrong that Elise felt her heart lurch. She approached slowly, kneeling before the child. Whispering soft, steady words, she lifted Aveline into her arms. The girl clung to her at once, burying her face against Elise's shoulder with a trust that broke her. The morning chill wrapped around them both, but the child's trembling eased beneath Elise's careful hold. She sat on a nearby bench, rocking Aveline gently, whispering promises she had no authority to make. No one should have left her alone, not even for a moment. She waited, expecting hurried footsteps or a frantic voice calling for the princess. Nothing came. The palace, usually restless with activity, seemed unaware that its smallest treasure had been forgotten in the open air. Elise felt a growing unease. She looked around, hoping to see a lady of the nursery approaching at last, but the gardens remained still. Aveline's breathing slowed. Exhausted from tears, she drifted into sleep, her tiny head resting against Elise's arm. Elise held her more securely, unable to bring herself to lay the child back onto the cold stones. Minutes stretched, heavy with an awareness she did not want to acknowledge. Something had gone terribly wrong. Then she heard footsteps. Firm, controlled, unmistakable. King Louis d'Artois entered the garden from the opposite path, his cloak brushing lightly against the gravel. His gaze roamed the grounds with the distant contemplation of a man seeking solitude. But the moment his eyes fell upon the sight before him, his stride halted, and the quiet air shifted. Elise's breath vanished. She rose at once, clutching the sleeping child. Louis stared at them, shock tightening his features. His daughter, in the arms of a maid who had no right to be so near her. The king approached slowly, as though trying to understand the scene before him. His voice, when he spoke, carried an edge that made Elise's knees weaken. "Who told you to take care of my daughter?" Elise tried to answer, but her throat trembled. She bowed her head, struggling for composure. The princess shifted lightly in her arms, and Elise instinctively adjusted her hold. Louis noticed the movement, and his expression darkened further. "I asked you a question." She swallowed, forcing her voice through the tightness in her chest. "Your Majesty." She was alone. She was crying. And cold. I could not leave her." Louis stepped closer. He lifted his daughter from Elise's arms, though Aveline whimpered faintly at the movement. He offered a low, soothing murmur to her, then looked back at the maid with a stare that cut through every layer of her composure. "Alone? Where were her attendants?" "I do not know, Your Majesty. I found her by the yew tree. No one was with her." The king's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, analyzing her face for any trace of deceit. Hellas held his gaze as long as she could, though fear trembled in her chest like a trapped bird. "Explain exactly what you were doing in this part of the garden." "I was crossing to the laundry quarters, Your Majesty." "I heard her crying. I came at once." Louis studied her a long moment. His daughter rested her head against his shoulder, still half asleep. Elise felt a sharp ache in her chest at the sight. A child should not have endured such fear on a cold morning. She clasped her hands together to still their shaking. Louis shifted his stance, his gaze heavy with something more than anger. Confusion, disbelief, and beneath that, an emotion he hid quickly. "Very well. You will present yourself to the steward immediately. He will question you further." Her breath caught. "Your Majesty, This is no matter for excuses. Go." The sharpness of the order struck like a slap. Elise bowed, stepping back. Louis turned away with Aveline in his arms, walking swiftly toward the palace. For a moment, Elise stood frozen where she was, her heart pounding in her throat. She had done nothing wrong, nothing except help a child, yet fear swelled inside her. She had spoken the truth, but truth often held little value in the hierarchy of Fontainebleau. As she made her way toward the steward's office, she caught glimpses of servants shifting aside, whispering, casting curious glances. Rumor traveled faster than sound in the palace. By the time she arrived, the steward's expression already bore a blend of suspicion and irritation. He did not offer her a seat. "Describe your conduct this morning." Elise recounted the events, her voice steady, though her palms dampened. The steward listened with an air of studied exasperation. "You found the princess entirely alone. No attendants nearby?" "None, sir. That is difficult to believe." He leaned back slightly, hands clasped behind him. "The ladies of the nursery are known for diligence." Elise felt a sting at the dismissal of her words. "I swear on my honor, sir, that is what I saw. Your honor is not what is in question." He paused. "The dignity of the royal household is." She felt the meaning behind the line like a blade grazing her skin. It was not her word that mattered, only the image the court wished to preserve. The steward motioned for her to stand aside while he summoned one of the senior attendants. Elise waited, palms pressed together, breath shallow. When Madame Vautrin entered the room, her gown swishing with the authority of her position, Elise felt the air shift. The governess bowed formally to the steward before speaking with seamless composure. "You wish to inquire about the princess's morning routine?" "Yes. It has been said she was found alone in the gardens." "Impossible," Madame Vautrin interrupted with calm certainty. "I left her with Lady Dufour only moments prior to sunrise. The child was never unattended." Elise's heart clenched. "That is not true. Madame Vautrin turned her eyes toward her, cool, level, dismissive. "Your name is Elise Moreau, is it not? You are quite new to the upper household." Elise nodded, unsure of what trap she had already stepped into. "Then perhaps you mistook another child's cry for the princess's. It is early, and many servants begin their day before the sun. It is an understandable confusion." "It was her," Elise insisted softly. Princess Aveline was alone. Madame Vautrin straightened her cuffs with serene patience. The princess was not alone, and no maid would be permitted to approach her, let alone hold her. "Surely you know that." Elise opened her mouth, but the steward spoke first. "This is a serious discrepancy, Miss Moreau." She looked from him to Madame Vautrin, trembling inside. They were not questioning what happened, they were rewriting it. Madame Vautrin continued, her tone smooth as polished marble. "It is possible the maid simply acted with good intentions, misunderstanding a moment she was not meant to witness. The suggestion sounded gentle, but the meaning beneath it was sharp and condemning. If Elise insisted further, she would be seen as insolent, disruptive, perhaps even dishonest. Her truth had become an inconvenience. The steward dismissed her with a curt nod, promising to deliver his findings to the king. Elise stepped out into the corridor, her legs weakened by the weight of what had just occurred. She pressed her back to the wall, exhaling slowly, willing her heartbeat to steady. Somewhere in the palace, the king would soon be told that she had misunderstood, exaggerated, or acted improperly. In the eyes of those above her, she was already responsible for the morning's disturbance. And yet she could not forget the way Aveline had clung to her. She could not forget the coldness of the bench, the absence of any guardian, the frantic sobs of a frightened child. As she stood there, struggling to calm her thoughts, a young footman stopped beside her. His glance was quick, almost nervous. "Miss Moreau," he said under his breath, "you should be careful. Some people don't want questions asked." She turned toward him, startled. "What do you mean?" He shook his head, glancing down the hall as if someone might overhear. "Just be cautious. Not everyone wants the truth spoken aloud." Before she could ask anything else, he hurried away, leaving her with a chill deeper than the morning air. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart beat against her ribs. The truth had placed her in danger, though she did not yet understand how or why. And as she stepped back toward her quarters, a single thought echoed through her mind. Someone had abandoned the princess intentionally, and someone else was determined to bury that fact forever. Louis would soon demand answers from the nursery attendants, only to find every one of them giving him the same rehearsed denial. And as he listened to their practiced composure, realization would strike him with growing certainty. Someone is lying. Elise reported to the laundry wing as ordered, but whispers chased her down every corridor. Servants paused mid-task to watch her pass, their eyes quick with curiosity and quiet judgment. She kept her gaze lowered, her hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. She had never sought attention, yet the palace now seemed to turn in her direction with unwelcome force. Before she could reach the far doorway, the steward's assistant intercepted her and commanded her to follow. She obeyed, unsure whether fear or duty moved her faster. They walked through narrow halls until they reached a dim chamber used for administrative hearings. A long table waited in the center, 3 supervisors seated behind it. Their stiff posture made her throat tighten. They looked at her not with curiosity, but with disappointment already formed, as though her guilt had been decided before she arrived. The assistant guided her forward. Elise curtsied, then folded her hands neatly. One of the supervisors, a stern woman named Madame Giraud, leaned forward at once. It seems there was a misunderstanding of serious nature this morning. We are here to clarify your conduct. Yes, madame, Elise answered softly. Another supervisor, Monsieur Pascal, raised a brow. The princess was found in your arms by His Majesty, a startling breach of conduct. You are aware of the rules regarding proximity to the royal children? Yes, sir, I am. But the princess was alone, crying. Madame Giraud cut her off. That is the point in doubt. The ladies of the nursery insist the princess was never unattended. They say you overstepped your place, perhaps with good intentions, but nonetheless a breach of boundaries. Elise felt her breath falter. That is not true. I found her alone by the yew. Madame Giraud lifted a hand. You claim to have found her alone, yet none of the attendants corroborate your story. All 3 state they were rotating their watch over the child. They weren't there, Elise insisted, though her voice trembled. If they had been, I would not have. Monsieur Pascal exhaled sharply. Miss Moreau, this is not a matter to debate. You are to answer questions, not question ladies of higher rank. The words struck like a blow. Elise lowered her eyes, swallowing the surge of helplessness rising in her chest. She felt like a child scolded for daring to tell the truth. Madame Giraud leaned back in her chair. Why did you take the princess from the ground? Because she was crying, Elise whispered. And cold. Cold? Monsieur Pascal repeated, sounding almost offended. The princess was properly dressed for the morning. She was sitting on the stones. Her cloak had slipped. And you are implying negligence on the part of the royal nursery, Miss Moreau, Madame Giraud said, her tone dangerously even. That is a severe accusation. I am only speaking what I saw. The third supervisor, Madame Rousseau, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice was thin, but her stare was sharp. Or perhaps you misinterpreted the situation. It is early. Your duties are demanding. A mistake of perception is not uncommon among newer staff. Elise's breath stung her lungs. I did not misinterpret anything. Madame Rousseau tilted her head. Then you are accusing the attendants of lying. Is that what you wish to record in this inquiry? Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Elise stared at the wooden table. If she said yes, she would be dismissed at once, perhaps even expelled from the palace grounds. If she said no, she would be agreeing to a falsehood that placed Aveline at risk again. The pressure suffocated her. I only want the truth known, she whispered. Madame Giraud's expression softened into something almost pitying, though Elise sensed the pity was not for her, but for the inconvenience she represented. Then perhaps you should reconsider the certainty of your memory, she said, for your own sake. Elise's fingers curled. She felt the walls closing in, every word from the supervisors pushing her deeper into a place where she had no voice. Monsieur Pascal tapped his quill. So you deny any wrongdoing, yet you cannot support your claim with witnesses. Do you understand the difficulty this places us in? Yes, sir, she said, though the words tasted like defeat. Madame Giraud clasped her hands together. Your account conflicts with the reports of women far above your rank. As such, we must consider the likelihood that you misunderstood your role this morning. You are a laundry maid, not an attendant of the royal nursery. I know my place, Elise murmured. Her eyes burned, but she blinked back the tears. I only acted because no one else was there. That again, Madame Giraud said with a sigh. You persist in this claim, because it is the truth. For the first time, irritation cracked through the supervisor's polite voice. Truth, Miss Moreau, must be supported by more than emotion, especially here. Elise felt something inside her crumble. They were not listening. They had already chosen what version of events was acceptable, and hers did not fit. The supervisors exchanged a glance. "You will be placed on temporary watch," Madame Giraud declared. "Until this matter is resolved, your duties will be restricted. You will not leave the service corridors without permission, and you will refrain from speaking of this incident to anyone." The order struck her like a cold wind. Restricted? Watched? As if she were the one untrustworthy? But before Elise could gather a response, the door opened. Madame Vautrin stood in the doorway, her expression calm and perfectly controlled. "I was asked to provide my testimony," she said, stepping inside. Elise's heart dropped. The governess approached the table with the grace of someone accustomed to authority. She bowed slightly to the supervisors. "Forgive my delay. I was ensuring the princess was comfortably settled after her morning distress." "Distress?" Elise whispered, stunned. So they admitted Aveline had cried, but Madame Vautrin continued smoothly. "Yes, she was distressed when I found her, moments after Lady Dufour briefly stepped away. I believe the maid's presence may have startled the child. It was inconsiderate of her to approach." Elise's eyes widened. "That is not what happened." Madame Giraud frowned at her. "You will not interrupt." "You are mistaken, Madame," Elise said, her voice rising despite her trembling. "You were not there. No one was there. I found the princess completely alone." Madame Vautrin turned to her, her face still and polite. "Miss Moreau, I understand you may be frightened. The king's presence can be overwhelming. It is possible you misremember the order of events." "I did not misremember anything." Madame Vautrin offered a soft smile, a smile that warned of consequences. "Perhaps you believe what you are saying, but I assure you, I left her in safe hands. You must have come upon the scene only after Lady Dufour had returned." "That is not true." Elise's voice cracked. "I held her because she had been crying for a long time. She was cold, and—" "Cold," Madame Vautrin repeated gently, as though addressing a child. "The princess wore a winter cloak. She could not have been cold unless she had been outside far longer than permitted. And that, my dear, is not possible." Elise's pulse hammered, but her courage wavered beneath the governess's poised authority. The supervisors exchanged approving glances. Monsieur Pascal looked at Elise with a tired expression. "Miss Moreau, your insistence on this version of events is troubling. It suggests either a misunderstanding or an attempt to discredit your superiors. Neither is acceptable." Elise felt her voice shrinking inside her. She had no power, no rank, no allies, only the truth, and the truth was losing ground. Madame Giraud closed her ledger. "We will conclude this session. A report will be prepared for His Majesty. You may return to your quarters. Remain available for further questioning." Elise curtsied weakly and stepped back. Madame Vautrin's eyes followed her with quiet triumph, disguised as compassion. As Elise left the chamber, the corridors seemed narrower than before, the walls closing around her with each step. She reached a secluded corner and pressed a hand to her chest, trying to breathe. Her truth had been crushed beneath polished words, practiced voices, and a hierarchy that cared more about reputation than honesty. She wiped her eyes quickly when she heard footsteps approaching. The palace librarian, Madame Roche, walked toward her, her expression cautious yet kind. "My dear, you look pale," she murmured. "What happened?" Elise hesitated, then whispered, "They think I lied. All of them. They say the princess was never alone." Madame Roche's eyes darkened with something like concern, or fear. "That is what they must say," she replied quietly. "Not what is true." Elise looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" Madame Roche glanced down the corridor before speaking. "Come, not here. Too many ears in these halls." But before they could take a step, a sharp voice echoed behind them. "Miss Moreau!" Elise turned, her stomach sinking. The steward's assistant stood rigid, his face unreadable. "The council has reached a decision. You are to be removed from all regular duties immediately." Her breath caught. "Removed?" He nodded once, cold as stone, effective at once. Elise felt the ground tilt beneath her, though she kept her expression composed. Removed from duties. The words echoed like a dull bell inside her chest. She clasped her hands to keep them steady and forced herself to speak. "May I ask for what reason?" The steward's assistant did not blink. The council felt it best given the confusion your presence has caused. Until further notice, you will remain confined to internal tasks. You are not to enter the nursery corridor or the royal wings under any circumstance. Madame Roche stepped forward, her tone firm. That is an unusually strict restriction for a simple misunderstanding. The assistant shifted uncomfortably but did not soften. Those are the orders. He nodded once and walked away before anything more could be said. Elise stood frozen. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Madame Roche touched her arm gently. Come, child. Walking will help you breathe again. There is nothing more you can do in this hallway. They moved along a quiet passage, the older woman leading with slow steps. When they reached the small antechamber to the library, Madame Roche turned to her with a look of solemn clarity. You must understand, she began softly. There are truths in this palace that are never spoken out loud. The ladies of the nursery. They have influence far beyond their station. Their families are tied to court politics. Complaints against them never reach the king. But why, Elise asked. Why hide something as simple as neglect? Simple, Madame Roche sighed. Nothing is simple here. Appearances are everything. If the king believed his daughter had been poorly supervised, heads would roll. Figuratively, of course. It is far more convenient to insist the mistake came from a maid with no title to defend herself. Elise lowered her gaze. But that places the princess at risk. Yes, the librarian whispered. And that is why I fear this is not the first time. Elise's head snapped up. What do you mean? Madame Roche hesitated, as if weighing words carefully. I have heard things. Quiet complaints from junior attendants. The princess wandered once during an afternoon music session. Another time she was left in her playroom for longer than intended. Each time reports vanished before reaching the king. Someone ensured the incidents were buried. Elise felt her breath stop. So this morning was not an accident. I do not know, the older woman replied, but I know this. The royal nursery protects itself fiercely. Anyone who disrupts their harmony is dealt with swiftly. Elise swallowed, her pulse quickening. I did only what anyone would do. Anyone with a heart. Madame Roche touched her cheek gently. And that, my dear, is exactly why you frightened them. You acted without concern for rank. You acted from compassion. People here rarely know what to do with such honesty. Before Elise could answer, a voice drifted down the corridor. Madame Roche, are you inside? It was a young clerk, breathless. The king has requested your assistance in retrieving the archived rota sheets of the nursery staff. Madame Roche stiffened. The king? Now? Yes, the clerk replied. He waits in the upper gallery. Elise and the librarian exchanged a glance filled with silent alarm. If Louis was asking for records, he was seeking truth. Truth no one wished him to see. Go, child, Madame Roche whispered. Return to your quarters before anyone notices you're here. Elise nodded and slipped away, though her mind buzzed with questions. She crossed the service halls, avoiding groups of servants who whispered behind raised hands. She reached her assigned room and closed the door softly, leaning against it with a trembling breath. Her world had shifted in a single morning. She had only done what kindness demanded. Yet now she was seen as a threat, someone to be controlled, silenced, removed. She sank onto her small stool, clasping her hands tightly. If the king found inconsistencies in the records, perhaps he would finally understand. But if the council persuaded him otherwise, she dared not imagine the consequences. A knock startled her. She straightened. Come in. The door opened and a timid girl no older than 14 stepped inside. Elise recognized her as a kitchen runner. The girl hugged a folded cloth to her chest. Miss Moreau, she whispered, I heard something. What is it? The girl stepped closer, voice shaking. When you were taken to the council, the ladies of the nursery gathered in the long gallery. They were speaking in low voices. Lady Dufour said she would not let a maid throw suspicion upon her, and Madame Vautrin said, she said you would be removed before causing further trouble. Elise's stomach twisted. Removed? The girl nodded quickly. I don't know what they meant, but they looked angry, afraid even. Elise placed a gentle hand on the girl's arm. Thank you for telling me, but you must not repeat any of this. Promise me. I promise, the girl whispered, then hurried out. Once alone, Elise paced the room. Her mind raced. They were not merely defending their reputation, they feared exposure. That much was now clear. She pressed her palm to her chest, forcing herself to breathe. If they had lied once, they would lie again. And if the king continued his inquiries, her thoughts were interrupted by another knock, this one firm, confident. Elise froze. She opened the door slowly and found a tall man in the royal uniform standing before her. "Miss Moreau," her voice barely rose. "Yes, His Majesty requests your presence." Her heart jolted. Requests? Was she in deeper trouble? Was this her final dismissal? The guard lowered his voice slightly. "The king asked for you personally. You are to follow me at once." She stepped out, each movement careful, as though the air had turned thin. They walked through corridors she had rarely been permitted to enter. Her pulse accelerated with every step. They reached a modest chamber near the west wing, a place of quiet, rarely used for official matters. The guard gestured. Inside, Elise hesitated, then stepped through the door. King Louis stood by a window, turning a set of documents in his hands. His posture was tense, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on the papers as though they had personally offended him. When he heard her enter, he lifted his head. Their eyes met, and Elise quickly lowered hers, curtsying deeply. "Your Majesty, you sent for me." "Yes." "Rise." She obeyed, though only slightly. Louis placed the documents on a narrow table, then approached her with deliberate steps. "I have spoken to the nursery attendants," he began, "and to the steward. Each one insists you misunderstood the situation this morning." Elise tried to steady her voice. "Your Majesty, I spoke only the truth." He nodded slowly. "So I suspected." Her breath caught. Louis continued, pacing a step. "But I wish to see the rota sheets for myself. The attendants told me they maintained their rotation without interruption." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "Yet the records for this morning are missing. Not misplaced. Removed." Elise felt a chill race down her spine. Louis's voice lowered. "Do you understand? Someone tampered with them." "Yes, Your Majesty." He studied her, his expression unreadable. "You have no reason to lie, no ambition, no connection to court intrigues. And yet those whose very duty is to protect my daughter cannot align their stories." Elise clasped her hands tightly. "I fear they fear consequences." Louis's jaw tightened. Consequences they deserve, if their negligence placed Aveline at risk. Silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. At last Louis stepped closer, his voice quieter. "I must ask you again, Miss Moreau, and I ask not as a king, but as Aveline's father. When you found her, was she truly alone?" Elise lifted her eyes to his. She saw not a monarch but a troubled man seeking clarity in a palace of shadows. "Yes, Your Majesty, completely alone, and frightened. I could not ignore her." Louis studied her face for a long moment. Then he exhaled, a sound of restrained frustration. "I believed as much. Your account never wavered." Her chest tightened with relief, but also fear. If the king believed her, the nursery staff would see her as an even greater threat. Louis turned away, pacing again. "This palace is full of pretenses. People rush to protect rank, even at the cost of truth. But I will not tolerate deceit when it concerns my child." Elise listened quietly, unsure whether she was meant to respond. At last the king spoke again, voice steadier. "I will conduct my own investigation, privately. I will not rely on their testimonies alone." Elise felt a flicker of hope. "Your Majesty, thank you." Louis faced her once more. "But understand this, Miss Moreau. If you are telling the truth, and I believe you are, you may have placed yourself in the path of people who will not easily forgive it." Her breath faltered. Louis's gaze softened. "I will see that you are protected. But I must know everything you observed this morning. Every detail." Elise nodded, then recounted the scene once more, her words careful but unwavering. She described the princess's trembling, the cold stones, the absence of footsteps, the long minutes before the king arrived. Louis listened in complete silence, his expression darkening with each sentence. When she finished, he stepped back, his voice low. Then someone failed her deeply, and they intended to hide it. Elise waited, uncertain what would follow. The king turned to the door as if preparing to leave, then paused. A thought seemed to strike him. He looked back at her, his eyes narrowing with a new, sharper concern. "Tell me, Miss Moreau, has anyone spoken to you since the inquiry? Anyone who wished to influence your account?" Elise's pulse spiked. She hesitated. Louis stepped closer. "Miss Moreau, I ask you plainly, has anyone approached you in warning or threat?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Yeah, Your Majesty." Louis's expression hardened. "Who?" Before Elise could answer, a sudden knock echoed sharply through the chamber, cutting the air like a blade. "Your Majesty," urgent voice called from the other side. "The head governess insists on speaking with you at once. She claims the matter of the princess has grown even more serious." Louis's head lifted sharply at the knock, but his eyes remained fixed on Elise. Her breath caught, her confession suspended between them. The king seemed torn between hearing her answer and responding to the urgent voice outside the door. He took one step toward her. "We will speak again," he said quietly. "Do not be afraid to tell me everything." Before she could respond, he turned and opened the door. Madame Vautrin stood on the threshold, her face arranged in perfect distress. She curtsied deeply. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. I would not disturb you unless I believed the matter grave." Louis's expression cooled. "What has occurred?" The governess clasped her hands. "It concerns Princess Aveline. Her morning behavior has been unsettled. I fear she may have been startled or mishandled in some way during the incident with the maid." Elise stiffened. Louis's gaze hardened. "You imply harm." "I imply nothing, Your Majesty," she answered with a trembling voice that struck Elise as entirely rehearsed. "I merely report what I observe." The princess clung to me with unusual agitation. I suspect she was overwhelmed by the maid's sudden approach earlier. It is possible Miss Moreau frightened her, perhaps unintentionally. Elise drew in a sharp breath, but Louis spoke first. "And you know this how?" Madame Vautrin hesitated just long enough for Elise to feel the hesitation was deliberate. She then bowed her head modestly. The child calmed only when removed from Miss Moreau's presence. "I thought it my duty to inform Your Majesty." Louis looked over his shoulder at Elise. She had not moved. Her hands were clasped tightly, her eyes lowered. The picture of a girl who had no defense except truth. He stepped aside and gestured to the governess. "Enter." Madame Vautrin glided into the chamber without a single glance at Elise, though Elise felt the silent dismissal in every line of the woman's posture. Louis closed the door behind them and turned toward her with a directness that seemed intended to prevent further evasions. "Explain precisely what you mean by unsettled." Madame Vautrin raised her chin delicately. She insisted on being carried. She refused the morning biscuit. She clung to my gown at the slightest sound. "These are not behaviors we see from her unless something has disturbed her deeply." Louis folded his arms. Yet none of this was mentioned earlier. The governess's eyelids fluttered, as though she were embarrassed by her own oversight. I feared I might be overreacting, but as the morning progressed I became certain her distress resulted from the maid's interference. Such an improper contact would bewilder a child of her age. Elise felt heat rush up her throat. Louis noticed. He turned to her. "Miss Moreau, did you harm or frighten the princess in any way?" Her voice barely rose. "No, Your Majesty, never. She was crying when I found her. She came to me. I would never cause her distress." Madame Vautrin's expression softened with an almost maternal sadness. "I believe Miss Moreau means well, but intentions do not erase consequences. Lower staff are rarely trained in soothing royal children. The smallest wrong gesture may startle them." Louis looked sharply back at her. "Why did none of Aveline's attendants report her distress to me before this moment?" Madame Vautrin spread her hands modestly. "We wish to examine the cause more fully before troubling Your Majesty. Now, with the facts clearer, I believe it is time to address the matter properly. The maid must be removed from any proximity to the princess." Elise's heart contracted painfully. Louis's gaze flicked between them. He stepped forward, voice lower and edged. "The facts, madame, remain far from clear. This morning's records have vanished, and the attendants' reports conflict with one another." Madame Vautrin froze only a heartbeat before replying. "That is troubling, Your Majesty. I assure you the nursery staff has no interest in concealing anything. We are devoted to the princess's welfare." Louis watched her carefully. Elise sensed a subtle shift. He was no longer simply questioning her. He was studying her. Madame Vautrin dipped her head. If records are missing, then surely someone outside the nursery tampered with them. No loyal attendant would risk such disgrace. Elise felt the accusation slide dangerously toward her. She stepped forward before she could stop herself. Your Majesty, I did nothing of the kind. I never touched any records. Madame Vautrin turned her gaze on her at last. No one accused you, Miss Moreau. But if there has been tampering, perhaps you misunderstood the importance of certain documents. Elise's breath shook. Your Majesty, please. She is twisting my words. I never... Louis lifted a hand, silencing them both. Enough. The command settled heavily between them. After a long moment, Louis addressed the governess. Madame Vautrin, you will return to the nursery. I will observe the princess myself. I want full access to her schedule, attendance, and activities. From this moment on, nothing regarding her care will be withheld from me. The governess paled, but she curtsied with perfect obedience. As you wish, Your Majesty. She withdrew from the room with measured steps. When the door closed behind her, silence settled like dust. Louis turned slowly toward Elise. She lifted her eyes only when he spoke. Your account contradicts that of women with influence and position, yet theirs contradict each other. That alone troubles me. Elise clasped her hands. I have told only what I saw. He nodded. And I believe you more each hour. The admission struck her like a breath of warm air after a long winter, but Louis's expression did not soften. If anything, worry deepened it. He walked to the table and picked up the papers again, empty spaces on a rota that should not have been empty. He spoke quietly, as if speaking mostly to himself. Someone is afraid of what the truth will reveal. Someone thinks you saw more than you should have. Elise lowered her gaze. I saw nothing besides a child abandoned. Louis turned. Exactly. Which is enough to unravel the lies of several people. He approached her then, closer than before, but his expression held only resolve, not warmth. He spoke in a tone that left no room for doubt. Miss Moreau, I need you to understand something clearly. If the nursery staff feels threatened by your honesty, they will not hesitate to undermine you again. Their positions depend on controlling the story. Elise's voice wavered. I never meant to create trouble. You spoke the truth. Trouble came because others feared it. Silence stretched. Elise felt her throat tighten. The king watched her closely, as though reading the fear she tried to hide. At last he said, You must remain vigilant. If anyone approaches you again, with warnings, pressure, or persuasion, I want to know immediately. She nodded, though her voice failed her. Louis turned away as if to end the conversation, but just as he reached the door, he paused. His voice was low when he spoke again. Tell me the name of the person who warned you earlier. Elise hesitated. The palace suddenly felt very large and she felt very small. She tried to answer, but before the words could leave her mouth, the door burst open without warning, and a breathless attendant rushed in. Your Majesty, Princess Aveline is asking for the maid. She refuses to be soothed by anyone else. Louis stared at the attendant as if he had misheard. Aveline is asking for whom? The maid, Your Majesty, the attendant replied, swallowing hard. She keeps repeating it. She pushes away the nurses. She cries each time they try to hold her. Elise's breath caught. She pressed a hand lightly to her chest, afraid to speak, afraid to move. Louis's gaze shifted slowly to her, his expression unreadable. Very well, he said at last. Bring us to her. The attendant bowed and led the way. Louis motioned for Elise to follow. She hesitated only a moment before obeying, her steps light, her heart heavy. She knew what her presence near the princess would mean. More eyes on her, more suspicion, more resentment. As they walked, servants stepped aside, whispering behind their hands. The palace felt suddenly divided between those who doubted her and those who watched her with a strange, cautious curiosity. Louis moved through them with silent authority, while Elise trailed behind, trying to keep her breathing steady. They reached the nursery wing. The moment Louis stepped inside, the cries of a child filled the room. High, distressed, desperate. Aveline sat in her small chair, her cheeks flushed, her arms stretched toward the doorway. She kicked away the biscuit in her nurse's hand and let out another sob. When she saw Elise, she froze. Then her face broke into a trembling whimper of relief. She reached both arms toward her with a cry so raw it silenced the entire room. "Elise!" The king turned slightly, observing. "Go to her, Miss Moreau." Elise stepped forward as if in a daze. Aveline leaned toward her with such certainty that the nurse, embarrassed, stepped back at once. Elise knelt, and the princess threw herself into her arms, burying her face against her shoulder. The child's small hands clutched her gown in frantic trust. "Hush, little one. I'm here," Elise whispered gently. Aveline's sobs softened almost immediately. Her trembling slowed. The room seemed to breathe again. But Elise felt the stares, sharp, resentful, stunned. Madame Vautrin stood near the window, her hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles whitened. She forced a smile toward the king. "Your Majesty, children often form sudden attachments. It means nothing." Louis raised a hand. "Enough." The governess fell silent. He stepped closer, watching his daughter with an expression that blended relief and indignation. Clearly, the princess knows whom she trusts. And clearly her earlier distress was not caused by this young woman. Madame Vautrin bowed her head, though her jaw tightened. Louis turned to Elise. "Continue holding her." Elise swallowed, unsure if she should even speak. "Yes, Your Majesty." She lifted Aveline, who curled into her as naturally as if they had known each other for years. The warmth of the small body against her chest filled her with a tenderness she had no right to feel, yet could not deny. Louis watched them both, his voice lowering. "Miss Moreau, come with me." The attendant stiffened. Madame Vautrin took a step forward. "Your Majesty, perhaps it is best to let the princess rest. Allow us to resume." Louis shot her a look. She fell instantly silent. He gestured for Elise to follow him into the adjoining chamber. She obeyed, carrying Aveline carefully. Once inside, Louis closed the door. For a moment he simply watched the two of them, Elise quiet and steady, and the princess nestled trustingly in her arms. He spoke softly. "She calmed at your touch alone." Elise kept her eyes lowered. "Children sense when someone cares for them, Your Majesty." "That is all." "No," he replied. "It is not all. Something is amiss in the nursery. Severely amiss, and I fear I have overlooked it." Elise felt her throat tighten. "Your Majesty, forgiveness, but I do not wish to bring trouble to anyone." Louis's gaze hardened. "Trouble already exists, you only revealed it." Aveline stirred and looked up at Elise with sleepy, damp lashes. Elise smiled softly and stroked her back. Louis watched that simple gesture with an expression she could not interpret. Something deep, something conflicted. Then he spoke again, voice steady. "I will institute changes at once. The attendants will be questioned separately. No reports will pass through intermediaries. And until the matter is settled, you, Miss Moreau, will assist in the princess's care." Elise's breath left her. "Your Majesty, people will—" "I know what people will say," he cut in, "and I no longer care about their opinions." She stared at him, stunned. He stepped closer, his tone quiet but firm. "You are here because Aveline feels safe with you, and because I need someone who will not lie to me." Elise's voice trembled. "I am honored, Your Majesty, but I am afraid of what others may attempt." Louis paused, his expression darkening. "You are right to be cautious. Someone tried to silence your truth. Perhaps more than one." Elise felt the weight of his words sink into her. She held Aveline a little closer. Louis drew a long breath. "I must ask again. Who warned you earlier? Who told you to stop asking questions?" She hesitated. The footman who spoke to her had been frightened. Naming him might bring trouble upon him. Louis sensed her hesitation. "You fear for the person?" "Yes, Your Majesty." He nodded. "Then tell me this. Was it a member of the nursery staff?" "No," she whispered. "A younger servant." "Then he is not the one I need to fear." Louis took a step closer. "Miss Moreau, if there is any other detail you have withheld out of fear, you must tell me now." Before Elise could respond, Aveline startled slightly, turning her face toward the door as faint raised voices drifted in. Louis frowned, stepped back, and opened the door. Madame Vautrin stood in the hallway with two attendants, their faces pale and drawn. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice sharp with urgency, "we must speak at once." Louis straightened. "What now?" Madame Vautrin exchanged a tense glance with the attendants before replying. A report has been submitted to the council. They claim Miss Moreau's conduct this morning was far more serious than initially described. They insist she attempted to remove the princess from the garden deliberately. Elise gasped. "Your Majesty, that is a lie." Madame Vautrin's eyes gleamed with triumph disguised as concern. "The council demands immediate action. They request Miss Moreau be dismissed from the grounds before sunset." Louis's expression froze, cold, unreadable, and suddenly dangerous in its stillness. He spoke only one sentence, but it carried through the corridor like a warning bell. "Who submitted this report?" Madame Vautrin's lips parted, but no sound emerged. For the briefest moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then she composed herself with practiced grace. "Your Majesty, the council did not specify the author. They claimed only that the report came from within the household staff." Louis stepped forward. "One more lie and very poorly constructed." Madame Vautrin stiffened. "I assure you, Your Majesty, I speak only what was conveyed to me." Louis's gaze hardened. "And I assure you, Madame, that I will determine who is lying. Every council report bears a seal. They do not appear magically." The attendants behind her shifted uneasily. One of them, a young woman named Celeste, avoided Louis's eyes, her hands trembling at her sides. The other, a sharper, older attendant named Adeline, held her chin high with brittle confidence. Louis studied both. Neither seemed eager to speak. Elise watched with growing dread, Aveline clinging tightly to her gown. Madame Vautrin cleared her throat. "Your Majesty, regardless of who wrote the report, the council believes the issue requires urgent resolution. They insist that the maid's presence threatens the princess's stability. The princess herself refutes that," Louis said calmly. "Tell me, do you think I am blind? Aveline does not approach strangers, nor does she cling to those who frighten her. Yet she clings to Miss Moreau." Madame Vautrin opened her mouth, but Louis cut her off. "Enough. You will not speak of dismissal again until I personally examine this so-called report." Madame Vautrin's composure cracked for a single second, an unmistakable flash of frustration. But she dipped into a shallow curtsy. "Yes, Your Majesty." Louis turned to Elise. "Come, you will stay with the princess until I return." Elise hesitated. "Your Majesty, I do not wish to cause further—" He looked at her with unexpected softness. "You have caused no trouble. Trouble was already present. You merely revealed it." Aveline leaned against Elise's shoulder, content as if choosing her guardian without hesitation. Louis's gaze followed that small gesture, and something in him quieted. Madame Vautrin watched, and though she kept her expression neutral, Elise sensed a tightening around her eyes, a silent, simmering resentment. Louis gestured toward a side chamber adjacent to the nursery. "Remain here. I will summon you if needed." Elise obeyed, carrying Aveline with her. She entered the small chamber and settled in a chair, rocking the child gently. The princess drifted into a soft sleep, small breaths warm against Elise's shoulder. But Elise's own breath came shallow. Her heart raced with each muffled voice from the hallway. She strained to hear. Louis's tone was cool and clipped, while Madame Vautrin's replies grew tight, defensive. Occasionally she caught the attendants' voices, hurried, nervous, attempting to mask cracks in their composure. Minutes passed. Elise kept Aveline calm, though her own thoughts twisted with dread. She could not shake the fear that the council, or those who controlled it, would push further now that the king himself questioned them. Suddenly the door opened. Madame Roche hurried inside, closing it behind her. Her cheeks were flushed from haste. "My dear," she whispered, her voice low and urgent, "I have only a moment. You must prepare yourself." "For what?" Elise breathed. Madame Roche clasped her hands. "I came from the archive room. The rota sheets for the past week are gone, completely gone, not misfiled, removed." Elise's heart dropped. Why would anyone— "To prevent the king from discovering the inconsistencies," the librarian said. "If he had seen them, he would have found several gaps. Enough to confirm your account." Elise felt faint. Madame Roche continued quickly. "Someone is panicking. Whoever opposed you thought the king would trust their word alone. They did not expect him to investigate personally." Before Elise could speak, footsteps approached. Madame Roche straightened instantly. "Be cautious. Every word you say now matters." She slipped out, just as Louis opened the main nursery door again. His face was composed, but a storm of thought moved behind his eyes. "Miss Moreau, come with me." Elise stood at once, carrying the sleeping princess. Louis gestured to a cradle nearby. "Place her there. She is safe." Elise laid Aveline gently in the cradle, brushing a curl from her forehead. The child sighed softly and curled into the blanket. Louis watched the tender gesture with quiet intensity before turning toward the back corridor. "Walk with me." They entered a narrow hallway meant for private use. The moment they were alone, Louis spoke. "The council denied sending any report about you." Elise felt her breath catch. Louis continued, voice firm. "They claim they received a report, sealed and signed by a member of the nursery, but that no such document now exists. Madame Vautrin insists she only repeated what she was told." Elise frowned. "But why would they create a false report, only to withdraw it?" Louis stopped walking. "Because, Miss Moreau, they expected me to accept their claim without question. When I demanded proof, the lie collapsed." Elise stared at him, stunned. He lowered his voice. "Someone in that wing believes they can manipulate me. Someone believes I will accept excuses to avoid discomfort. They think they can decide what truth I see." Elise clasped her hands, her voice trembling. "Your Majesty, I fear I have placed you in a difficult position." Louis's gaze softened. "No, you have revealed the truth of my court, something few dared to show me." They walked again, slower this time. Elise felt the tension in her chest loosen, though uncertainty still clouded her thoughts. Louis stopped near the window overlooking the inner courtyard. Sunlight filtered through, soft but pale. He faced her fully. "Miss Moreau, I will not allow them to punish you for honesty. From this moment your dismissal is forbidden. No action will be taken without my approval." Elise blinked, unable to speak. Gratitude, relief, and disbelief collided inside her. But Louis added, "And for your protection, I will assign you a temporary position near the princess. You will assist me directly in watching over her." Elise's breath trembled. "Your Majesty, that is beyond my place." Louis's voice softened. "The palace forgot its purpose. You reminded it." She swallowed hard. "But the others, the nursery staff, they will resent me even more." Louis looked away, his jaw tightening. "Their resentment is already guaranteed. Your presence challenges them." He stepped closer. "I cannot force trust among them, but I can ensure your safety." Elise felt warmth bloom beneath her fear, not from his closeness, but from the sincerity she sensed in him, rare in a place filled with masks. Louis inhaled slowly. "But I must ask you something else, something I fear is important." Elise nodded, heart thudding. "When you found Aveline, did you hear anything unusual? Voices? Footsteps? Anything that suggests someone else had been nearby?" Elise closed her eyes, searching her memory. The cold stones, the trembling child, the early light. Silence, except... She gasped softly. Louis leaned closer. "What is it?" Elise opened her eyes. I heard footsteps, very light ones. Not long before I reached her. I thought it was only another servant, but when I arrived, no one was there." Louis's brow creased. "Light footsteps, running, walking away," Elise said. "Quickly, but not running." Louis stepped back, thinking. "That is important. Whoever left her there may have heard you approaching." Elise shivered. "If someone abandoned Aveline, why would they flee? Why leave her alone?" Louis looked into her eyes, his voice low and strained with realization. "Because leaving her alone was not the mistake, Miss Moreau. It was the intention." Elise felt her breath freeze. Louis continued. "And that means the attempt to remove you was not about reputation. It was about silencing the one person who could reveal what they did." His words struck her like a cold wind. He stepped closer again. "From this moment you must not walk alone in the palace." Elise swallowed. "Then, who will protect me?" Louis met her gaze, steady, unwavering. "I will." Before Elise could reply, a frantic knock echoed down the corridor. "Your Majesty," the steward cried from the opposite end. "The council demands your presence immediately. They claim to have discovered a witness who saw everything." Louis did not move at first. The steward's voice echoed down the corridor, sharp and urgent, but the king's expression remained still, unreadable. Elise felt her pulse quicken. A witness? After all the lies, all the contradictions, now a witness conveniently appeared. Louis finally spoke, voice quiet and edged with steel. "A witness," he repeated. "Very well. Let us see what tale they have invented now." He motioned for the steward to lead the way. Elise followed a few steps behind, her breath tight in her throat. Louis glanced back at her once, a silent reassurance that she should remain close. Even so, dread coiled inside her. Someone had finally stepped forward to speak against her, someone bold enough or desperate enough to fabricate a story the council could use. As they approached the hearing chamber, murmurs leaked beneath the heavy door. Louis entered without waiting for announcement. Silence spread through the room instantly. Supervisors rose. Several noble ladies stood near the walls, whispering behind gloved hands. At the center, near the long table, stood Madame Vautrin and 2 attendants, and beside them, pale as milk, wringing her hands furiously, stood Celeste. Elise's heart dropped. Celeste, the timid attendant from the nursery, the one who had trembled when Louis confronted them, the one who could hardly look anyone in the eye. The steward stepped forward. "Your Majesty, this young woman has come with information regarding the events of this morning." Louis folded his arms, then let her speak. Celeste looked from Elise to Louis, then down at the floor, tears forming in her lashes. Her voice trembled as she began. "Your Majesty, I saw something this morning. Something I should have reported sooner." Madame Vautrin nodded encouragingly, though the gesture seemed more like pressure. "Speak, child. The truth is all we seek." Elise's stomach twisted. Louis's gaze hardened. "Go on," he said. Celeste wrung her hands tighter. I was near the garden gate to fetch linens from the drying racks, and I saw the maid, Miss Moreau, walking with the princess in her arms." The room stirred. Elise gasped. "That is not true." Louis lifted a hand to silence her. Celeste continued, voice quivering. "She was going toward the far garden, past the yew tree. I thought she had permission, but later I heard she had not." Madame Giraud leaned forward, triumphant. "And did you see any of the nursery attendants nearby at that moment?" Celeste shook her head, eyes wide with fear. "No, madame. Only the maid, Miss Moreau." Elise took a step toward her. "Celeste, please, look at me. You know that is not what happened." Celeste broke, a small strangled sob escaping her. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to speak, but they said—" Her voice cut off instantly as Madame Vautrin shot her a warning glare. The girl's mouth snapped shut, terror flooding her features. Louis watched the exchange with sharpened attention. His tone was calm, but dangerously so. "They said what?" Celeste trembled, her fingers twisting in her apron. I only wanted to keep my position, Your Majesty." The head governess stepped forward swiftly. "The girl is clearly overwhelmed. She may confuse what she saw, but she wished to speak, so we allowed her to." Louis approached Celeste slowly. She stared at the floor, shaking. He crouched slightly to meet her line of sight. "Child, look at me." She lifted her eyes with effort. They swam with fear. "Did you truly see Miss Moreau carrying my daughter away from her attendants?" Celeste's lower lip quivered. I saw her holding the princess. That much is true. Did you see her moving away from the palace?" "No. Only toward the trees." Louis's voice remained steady. "Did she appear to be fleeing, trying to hide the child? Or did she look as though she were comforting her?" Celeste hesitated. Her breath came in quick, frightened bursts. "Your Majesty, she looked like she was comforting her." A gasp rippled through the room. Madame Vautrin's face went rigid. Louis straightened slowly. "So what you saw was a maid holding a distressed child, nothing more?" Celeste's tears spilled. "Yes, Your Majesty. I'm sorry. I should have said it differently," and Madame Vautrin snapped. "Child, you must be clear." Louis cut her off, his tone sharp. "That is enough, madame." She flinched, stepping back. Louis turned to the council. "This child does not accuse Miss Moreau. She confirms the princess was in distress before I arrived, and confirms the attendants were absent." Madame Giraud opened her ledger. "Your Majesty, the girl's statement still raises concerns. Why was Miss Moreau handling the princess at all?" Because no one else was, Louis replied coldly. Because she was abandoned. Whispers surged. Elise couldn't breathe. Louis stood tall, his authority absolute, his voice steady. Miss Moreau acted with compassion. The child verifies nothing against her. If anything, she confirms the negligence I suspected. Madame Vautrin's composure cracked again. Your Majesty, the girl is young, easily influenced. Her recollection may be— Louis turned his gaze on her, a gaze so stern, so commanding that the governess fell silent mid-sentence. Enough excuses. I will not tolerate further deception. He faced the room with full royal authority. Until I complete my private inquiry, all attendants involved in the morning rotation are suspended, effective immediately. Gasps erupted. Adeline staggered. Celeste sobbed harder. Madame Vautrin's face drained of colour. Suspended, she managed. Your Majesty, such an action will disrupt— Louis's voice dropped. What has disrupted the nursery is not my judgment. It is your failure. Madame Vautrin collapsed into a stiff curtsy, but her eyes flicked toward Elise with icy fury. The message was clear. This was not over. Louis looked toward Elise. Come with me. They left the chamber, Elise following in stunned silence. The corridor outside was empty, quiet, as if the palace itself held its breath. Louis slowed his pace so she walked beside him rather than behind. You see now, he said quietly, someone is terrified of the truth reaching me. They grasp at any lie, any witness, any scrap of accusation. Elise folded her hands tightly. Celeste was forced into it. Louis nodded. Yes. Someone pressured her. But she broke under questioning. Her fear spoke louder than their manipulation. Elise swallowed. What will happen to her? She will not be punished for speaking, nor for breaking under fear. She is a victim of their coercion, not a conspirator. Elise released a shaky breath. Louis continued, his tone softening. Today has shown me two things, Miss Moreau. First, there is a rot within the nursery staff that must be cut out entirely. Second, you are at the center of their fear. Because you saw the simplest truth. Aveline was left alone. Elise nodded slowly. My only wish was to protect her. And you did. More than those entrusted with her care. She lowered her gaze. Your Majesty, if I had not come upon her— Louis cut in quietly, his voice growing tight. Do not think of that. She is safe because of you. Silence stretched between them. A thoughtful, heavy silence, like something unspoken hovered in the air. At last, Louis exhaled. There is one person left I must speak to, someone whose account has not yet been heard. Who? Elise asked. Louis looked at her, not as a king, but as a man who had finally reached a conclusion he could no longer ignore. The princess, Elise startled. Aveline, but she is so young. Young, yes, Louis said, but children recall more than we believe. Sometimes they remember feelings, sounds, voices. I will watch her reaction. It may tell me what words cannot. Elise nodded slowly. She knew well how children express truth in ways adults could not. Louis placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Return to the nursery chamber. Stay with her. I will join you shortly. Her heart fluttered, not with fear now, but with something warmer, something dangerous to feel. Yes, Your Majesty. She turned to go, but before she could take a single step, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed behind them. A young servant sprinted toward them, breathless, terrified. Your Majesty, please, you must come at once. Louis stiffened. What is it? The servant swallowed hard, his voice breaking. It's the princess. She woke up crying again, and she keeps asking for someone who isn't there. Louis reacted at once. For whom? He demanded. The servant hesitated, his breath still unsteady. For the maid, Your Majesty. For Miss Moreau. She keeps repeating her name and refuses everyone else. Elise felt her chest tighten. Louis exhaled slowly, as if confirming a truth he had already begun to suspect. Take us to her, he ordered. They strode down the corridor with quick, steady steps. Elise kept pace, her thoughts racing. She had not meant to become someone the princess clung to. She had not sought any of this. Yet Aveline's trust was genuine, instinctive, and unforced, and in a palace built on appearances, such purity seemed to unsettle everyone. When they reached the nursery chamber, they found two attendants, neither from the original staff, kneeling beside the cradle, whispering desperately to the small girl. Aveline sat upright, her face flushed from tears, her tiny fist gripping the edge of her blanket with determined misery. The moment she saw Elise, she reached out her arms, her cry breaking into a shuddering breath of relief. Louis stepped aside. "Go to her." Elise approached, and Aveline leaned forward eagerly. Elise gathered her into her arms, rocking her softly. The child settled almost immediately, her sobs fading into soft hiccups. The attendants watched with a mixture of awe and insecurity, relieved to be spared blame, but humbled by the obvious truth. Louis watched too, but his expression was unreadable, soft around the edges yet troubled beneath. After a moment he asked quietly, "Can you tell what frightened her?" Elise shook her head. Her voice trembled. "Only that she feels lost when she wakes and sees unfamiliar faces." Louis stepped closer, his voice low. "And when she sees yours, she feels safe." Elise looked down. "I do not know why, Your Majesty." "I do," he murmured. "Children trust sincerity. It is rare in this palace." Aveline snuggled against Elise's shoulder, already drifting back into drowsiness. Louis gestured to the attendants. "Thank you. You may return to your stations for now." They curtsied and withdrew, leaving Louis and Elise alone with the child. For a long moment neither spoke. The quiet was gentle, filled only with Aveline's soft breaths and the faint rustle of Elise's gown. Louis stood a few steps away, watching with a thoughtful gravity that made Elise's heart flutter, in a way she did not dare acknowledge. At last he broke the silence. "Miss Moreau, there is something I must tell you." She lifted her eyes. "The nursery staff, those who were suspended, they have requested a private audience with members of the court. They wish to defend themselves. They will accuse you again, perhaps more forcefully this time." Elise's hands tightened around Aveline. "They won't stop," she whispered. "No," Louis agreed, "they will not. Not unless someone forces them to. Their reputations depend on proving you wrong." She looked down at the child. "I do not care for my own reputation, but I care for hers." Louis's gaze softened. "And that is why you must remain close to her. Until I finish this investigation, I want you within sight of either myself or someone I trust." Elise took a breath. "Who do you trust, Your Majesty?" Louis hesitated, a hesitation that spoke louder than any confession. Then he answered, "You." She felt her heart stutter. She held Aveline closer to steady her hands. "Your Majesty, that honor is too great." "It is not an honor," Louis said. "It is a necessity. You have proven your loyalty in the simplest, clearest way possible, by protecting a frightened child with no audience to praise you. That is loyalty the court cannot imitate." Elise lowered her eyes to hide the warmth rising within her. She knew she should feel only duty, but something gentler pulled at her heart. Louis stepped forward, voice quiet. "Tell me, has anyone else spoken to you since this morning? Anyone who warned you, threatened you, pressured you to stay silent?" Elise hesitated. Then, "Just one, a footman. He warned me to be careful." Louis's expression darkened. "Who?" She shook her head. "He meant no harm, Your Majesty. He was frightened. More for me than himself." Louis seemed ready to argue, but then he sighed. "Very well, I will not question him. Not yet." He paced slowly, the weight of the situation settling upon his shoulders. Elise watched him in silence, sensing the tension beneath his calm movements. He turned back to her. "I will speak with Aveline now, while she is calm. Children often express truth without meaning to." Elise nodded and sat with the child cradled in her arms. Louis crouched slightly, his features softening as he looked at his daughter. Aveline blinked up at him sleepily. "Aveline," he said gently, "do you remember this morning?" She nodded, rubbing her eyes. "Can you tell me what happened?" Aveline shifted. Then she reached out a small hand toward Elise's collar. "Lisa," she murmured. "I know, little one," Elise whispered. "But what about before that?" Louis tried again. "Who was with you, Aveline?" The child frowned. Then she whispered one soft, wavering word. "Nobody." Louis inhaled sharply. Elise bowed her head over the child, her throat tightening. Aveline continued, her small voice trembling. "Cold." Louis closed his eyes briefly, a single breath escaping him, heavy with realization. "Thank you," he whispered to his daughter. Aveline reached for him, and he brushed her cheek with the back of his hand before letting her settle again against Elise. He stood slowly, his posture straightened, his jaw set. Whatever uncertainty had remained within him was gone, completely gone. At last he spoke, and his voice carried quiet thunder. "I now know what truly happened." Elise's breath caught. She searched his face, but his expression had turned resolute, determined, kingly in a way she had never seen. All hesitation had vanished. Louis stepped closer, so close that his words reached only her. "Miss Morosam, from this moment on you are under my protection, and so is the truth you revealed." Elise whispered, "Your Majesty, you place yourself against all of them." He answered without pause, "Then let them come." Before she could reply, a knock sounded abruptly at the nursery entrance. A messenger stepped inside, bowing deeply. "Your Majesty, Madame Vautrin requests another audience. She says she has information that will change everything." Louis dismissed the messenger with a brief nod but did not move at once. For a moment he stood perfectly still, the weight of the palace's duplicity settling upon him. Elise held Aveline close, unsure if she should speak or remain silent. At last, Louis looked at her. "Whatever she believes she has uncovered," he murmured, "it will not change the truth, and I will not allow her to use this moment to harm you." Elise nodded, though worry pinched her breath. She had seen Madame Vautrin's eyes earlier, sharp with resentment, desperate to preserve her authority. People cornered by truth often clung hardest to their lies. Still, the child in her arms felt warm and calm, and that steadied her more than words ever could. Louis motioned to her gently. "Stay here. I will meet her in the council chamber. You remain with the princess. I would trust her with no one else." Elise lowered her gaze, moved by the quiet certainty in his tone. "Yes, Your Majesty." He hesitated at the door, just long enough to meet her eyes again. His expression softened, the hardness fading. "I will return soon." She watched him disappear into the corridor before settling near the cradle, still rocking Aveline. The princess was half asleep, her fingers loosely curled in Elise's gown. The trust of a child was a fragile, precious thing, and Elise felt its weight as if it had been placed directly into her hands. Time passed in a calm, steady rhythm. The palace, for once, seemed quiet. No hurried footsteps, no hushed whispers. Only the gentle breath of a sleeping princess and the distant murmur of voices somewhere far beyond. Madame Roche entered softly a few minutes later. The librarian paused at the sight of Elise holding Aveline and smiled with something like relief. "I thought you might need company," she said. Elise returned a small smile. "The princess is calm now." Madame Roche knelt beside them. "I saw the king heading toward the council chamber. His face left little doubt. He has made his choice." Elise exhaled slowly. "I fear for him. He has placed himself against the entire nursery staff." Madame Roche's eyes warmed. "Kings must sometimes stand alone to be worthy of the crown, and this king, I believe, has finally remembered that." They shared a quiet moment, a fragile peace amid the chaos of the day. Eventually, Aveline stirred. Elise shifted her gently. Madame Roche watched the small movement with soft affection. "She is truly bonded to you now." Elise looked down at the child. "I never thought such a bond would form. I only wanted her to stop crying." And thus, Madame Roche whispered, a bond was formed, not of duty but of kindness. Such things do not unravel easily. Elise brushed a curl from Aveline's forehead. She thought of the nursery staff, their polished lies, their practiced smiles. Then she thought of Louis, his patient questions, his quiet protectiveness. She felt the difference like night and day. Madame Roche rose. "I will return to the archive rooms. With the staff suspended, I might retrieve something of what they hid." "Thank you," Elise replied softly. The librarian squeezed her shoulder gently before slipping out. More time passed. Afternoon light drifted across the floor, warming the chamber in pale gold. Aveline slept peacefully now, with none of the tension she had shown earlier. Elise hummed softly, a tune her mother used to sing long before life had led her to these palace walls. A sudden knock startled her. She looked up quickly, holding Aveline steady. The door opened, revealing Louis. He entered quietly and closed the door behind him. Elise searched his face for signs of conflict, but what she found instead was a deep, steady calm. "Your Majesty," What did Madame Vautrin wish to reveal? Louis approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the sleeping child. He placed a gentle hand on Aveline's back before speaking. She confessed. Elise's breath vanished. Confessed? Louis nodded. Her story unraveled under scrutiny. When I confronted her with the missing records, the inconsistent testimonies and her pressure on young Celeste, she could not maintain the facade. Elise's voice wavered. What did she say? Louis sighed. She admitted that the attendants had grown complacent, dangerously so. They rotated improperly, relied on one another without checking, and occasionally left Aveline unattended, believing she would not wander. This morning was the worst of these errors. Elise felt a sharp ache in her chest. So it was carelessness. Carelessness, yes, Louis said quietly, and fear of losing their positions, fear of my judgment. But negligence remains negligence, no matter its cause. He brushed Aveline's cheek softly, and they attempted to silence the one person who revealed the truth. Elise looked down, unsure what to say. Louis straightened. I have dismissed Madame Vautrin from her position. The other attendants will be reassigned. None will return to the nursery. Her eyes widened. All of them. Louis nodded. Aveline deserves those who will protect her, not those who abandon her and lie to defend themselves. Elise swallowed. And what of Celeste? Louis's expression softened. She will remain. Her fear was forced upon her. She wishes to serve with honesty. Elise nodded slowly. It was right. All of it felt right. Louis walked closer, stopping just in front of her. He lowered his voice. I know today has been difficult for you, but the danger is past now. The truth has come out. Relief swept through her, warm, overwhelming, almost dizzying. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the truth sink in. The lies had been dismantled. The weight pressing on her chest loosened at last. When she looked up, Louis was watching her with an expression she could not easily decipher. Respect, certainly. Gratitude, and something quieter beneath. He stepped closer, his voice gentling. You have endured much. More than anyone should have to bear in a single day. I only did what was right, she whispered. Most people do not, he replied. Aveline shifted in Elise's arms, lifting her tiny head just enough to blink sleepily at the king. He smiled faintly, brushing her cheek again. Then his gaze lifted back to Elise. The nursery will undergo changes. It will be rebuilt from the ground up. I will ensure proper staff are appointed, people I can trust. But until these matters settle, I must rely on someone who has already proven her devotion to the princess. Elise froze. Your Majesty. Louis spoke gently yet firmly. I wish you to remain at Aveline's side, as her caretaker, for as long as you choose to stay. Elise's breath caught, her heart beat quick, unsteady rhythms beneath her ribs. She searched his face, unsure she had heard correctly. But, Your Majesty, I am only a laundry maid. You are more, Louis said softly. You proved it when no one else would. And Aveline loves you. Elise felt tears prick her eyes. The palace had crushed her that morning, questioned her integrity, humiliated her, pushed her toward dismissal. Yet here she stood, trusted by the king, held by the princess, and seen perhaps for the first time. She bowed her head to hide the tremor in her voice. If it is your wish, Your Majesty, then I will stay. Louis released a breath that seemed to lift years from his shoulders. Good. Then we are agreed. They shared a quiet moment, as Aveline drifted back to sleep. Outside, the distant clatter of palace life continued, yet none of it felt intrusive anymore. The danger had passed. The lies had unraveled. Peace, fragile, new but real, settled between them. Louis's voice softened. There is one more matter to settle. The council and the court must hear the final verdict, and I will deliver it myself. Elise nodded. What will you say? Louis met her gaze, his eyes steady and warm. The truth, that you protected my daughter, that you were wronged, and that the palace will change because of your courage. She felt warmth rise to her cheeks. It overwhelmed her, not for glory, but because she had survived something she feared she would not. And because he believed her when no one else had. Louis stepped back toward the door. Rest now. Stay with her. Tonight, everything begins anew. Elise nodded, her heart full. As he left, Aveline curled closer into her. murmuring softly. Elise kissed the crown of her head, feeling the weight of the long day lift. For the first time since morning, she felt completely safe. Yet when she laid Aveline down and reached to straighten the blanket, she found a small, folded slip of parchment tucked beneath the cradle's cushion. Her breath caught as she opened it. In hurried handwriting, one line stared back at her. "You think it is over, but someone else knows what you saw." Elise stared at the note, her breath frozen. The ink looked freshly written, the strokes hurried, the message brief yet heavy. "Someone else knows what you saw." Her heart struck against her ribs, a violent reminder that not all shadows had lifted. She folded the parchment quickly and tucked it within her apron, careful not to alarm the sleeping princess. Aveline sighed contentedly, unaware of the fear that threaded through the room. Elise pressed a hand to her own chest, steadying herself. She refused to let panic take hold. Not now, not when the truth had finally begun to settle in her favor. Soft footsteps echoed outside the chamber. Elise turned sharply, nerves prickling, then exhaled in relief when Louis appeared, returning sooner than expected. His expression eased when he saw her unharmed, sitting near the cradle. But he caught the faint unease in her posture at once. "Are you well?" he asked, voice low, gentle but alert. Elise hesitated. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Only tired." Louis stepped closer, studying her. Not entirely true. She lowered her gaze. She did not want to burden him, not after everything he had already carried today. But Louis's voice softened. "Elise, look at me." She did. And his expression, steady, concerned, unguarded, pulled the truth from her gently. Someone left a note. He tensed. A note. She reached into her apron, retrieving the parchment. Louis took it, reading the message in a single glance. His jaw tightened. "Where did you find this?" "Beneath the cradle cushion." Louis closed his eyes briefly, breathing through the surge of anger. "Whoever wrote this is trying to frighten you, or silence you, but they are too late. The truth is established. The attendant's negligence has been proven." Elise nodded, though fear still tugged at her ribs. "I know. But someone else was near the gardens, someone I never saw." Louis stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And whoever it is, they have now revealed themselves. A mistake they will regret." He moved to the cradle and checked little Aveline, smoothing the blanket gently. His shoulders relaxed only slightly when he saw the princess was still peacefully asleep. "Do not let this alarm you," he said, though his own tone betrayed how deeply it unsettled him. "Tonight the council gathers for the final verdict. When I speak, no one will dare threaten you again." Elise nodded. The thought of Louis defending her before the entire court made her chest warm with gratitude, and something more tender, something she barely dared name. Louis straightened and offered his hand. "Come, you must stand with me." "Me?" She shook her head. "Your Majesty, I do not belong in council chambers. You belong where the truth belongs." His voice softened. "And beside Aveline. Besides, I cannot ask you to hide when you have shown more courage than all of them combined." Her breath wavered. His words held warmth that reached deeper than duty. She nodded, rising to her feet. A servant was summoned to watch over Aveline as she slept. Elise followed Louis through the corridors, their steps echoing in silent harmony. Servants bowed, guards stiffened, courtiers whispered. But Louis walked as if none of them existed. He gave no one his attention except the maid who walked beside him. The council chamber doors opened. Silence fell instantly. The nobles stood. The supervisors bowed. Suspended attendants lingered near the back, pale and trembling. Madame Vautrin, dismissed from her station, stood rigidly near the far wall, her eyes burning with resentment and humiliation. Louis did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room with all the weight of the crown. "We will not delay," he said. "The truth regarding Princess Aveline's endangerment is now clear. The attendants failed in their duty. They lied in their reports. They attempted to coerce false testimony and deflect blame onto an innocent maid who acted only with compassion." Gasps rippled. The attendants ducked their heads in shame. Madame Vautrin closed her eyes, swallowing hard. Louis continued. "Miss Moreau discovered my daughter abandoned, alone. She saved her from cold and distress. and brought her comfort no one else managed. For that, she was met with accusation instead of gratitude. That ends now. Elise felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back quickly. Louis turned toward her. "Step forward, Miss Moreau." Her knees nearly weakened, but she obeyed. The nobles parted, whispering. She felt their eyes on her, curious, startled, some even warm. Louis's voice carried softly. This young woman protected the princess when others did not. Her honesty revealed what many wished to bury, and her courage restored what this palace had lost: integrity. Elise lowered her head, overwhelmed. Louis spoke again. "From this day forward, Miss Moreau is to serve as caretaker to Princess Aveline, with full trust of the crown." Murmurs spread through the room. Elise felt breathless. She had gained a place of honor she never sought, but Louis wasn't finished. There remains one more matter. The chamber fell utterly silent. Louis stepped toward her, his expression shifting, gentler, almost luminous with emotion he could no longer hide. "Miss Moreau," he said softly, "you showed devotion with no expectation of reward. You offered kindness, expecting no praise. You acted from heart, not ambition. And I have come to value your presence more than I expected, more than I am perhaps allowed to say within these walls." Her breath shivered. She lifted her eyes to his, unable to look away. Louis continued, his words steady, meant only for her, yet heard by all. "Aveline trusts you, and I have come to trust you with my daughter's safety, and with my own conscience." Elise felt her cheeks warm. Her hands trembled. The chamber seemed to fade, leaving only him. Louis stepped closer, his voice lowered, intimate but unwavering. "If you would accept, I wish to offer you not only a position by the princess's side, but a place by mine." The room erupted with whispers. Elise felt her heart stop for a breath, then surge painfully alive. "Your Majesty," she whispered. He reached out gently, not touching her yet, but offering his hand, a quiet invitation. Not forced by power, offered with hope. "You are the light that stepped into a shadowed morning, Elise Moreau. If you choose it, I ask you to stand beside me, not as a servant, as my partner, my equal in heart, and in time, my wife." Her tears spilled, not from fear, not from shock, but from the overwhelming warmth that filled her chest, a warmth she had tried to ignore, afraid of wishing for too much. Louis stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "If it is too much, I will accept your refusal with grace. But I could not leave this truth unsaid." Elise pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, breath shaking. She had wanted nothing, expected nothing. Yet her heart had quietly moved toward him from the very first questioning, when he had looked past her fear and sought her truth. She lowered her hand, voice unsteady but strong. "Your Majesty, I do not know how to stand beside a king, but I know how to love honestly, and I know how to protect those entrusted to me. If you believe my heart is enough, then yes, I will accept." The room gasped in a single wave. Louis exhaled a quiet, relieved breath, and for the first time that day, he smiled fully, warmly, without restraint. "Then let it be known," he said, turning to the council, "the maid who saved my daughter's life will become queen by the will of my heart, and by the truth she carried fearlessly." Before the room could erupt again, Aveline's sleepy voice called faintly from the doorway, "Elise!" They turned. A guard had brought the princess, awake and reaching. Elise hurried to her, gathering her into her arms. The child placed her head on Elise's shoulder, content as before. Louis approached them both slowly, touched by the gentle scene. Aveline looked up at him, then at Elise, and placed her small hands on both of theirs, connecting them with innocent certainty. Louis smiled at the gesture. "It seems," he murmured, "Aveline approves." Elise laughed softly through her tears. The sound lightened the entire room. Louis bent slightly, his face inches from hers, voice warm. "Will you walk with me, Elise?" She nodded. Together they stepped from the council chamber, king, maid, and child, no longer shadowed by lies or fear. The palace seemed brighter as they passed through it, whispers shifting from scandal to admiration, from disbelief to reluctant joy. They reached the gardens, the same place where everything had begun. The early evening sun cast soft gold across the stones, where Aveline had once sat abandoned. Now she stood between them, holding their hands. Louis turned to Elise. "This was where I found you, holding her, caring for her." Elise nodded, and feared I had done wrong. "And yet," he said, "you did everything right." Aveline tugged at Elise's gown, and then at Louis's cloak, as if insisting they come closer. Louis chuckled, leaning slightly closer to Elise. "May I?" he whispered. She looked up. Her eyes glowed gently. "Yes." Louis touched her face with a tenderness that made her breath stop, light as a whisper, slow as a promise. Then he leaned in, brushing his lips softly, reverently against hers. It was not urgent or possessive. It was warm, grateful, certain. Aveline giggled and clapped her tiny hands. Louis drew back, smiling with the kind of smile a king rarely showed the world. Elise felt warmth spread through her chest, brighter than anything she had ever known. Louis's voice softened. "Our lives change now. Yours, mine, hers. But I promise you this. Your kindness will shape this home more than any crown I could wear." Elise rested her forehead against his for a brief, precious moment. Then she looked down at Aveline, who held their hands tightly, as if binding them together. Louis whispered, "Shall we go inside? Our future awaits." Elise nodded, tears shining, heart full. Together they walked back toward the palace, toward a life built on truth, on renewal, on a love born from courage, a love that had changed the course of a kingdom simply by existing. Louis squeezed her hand gently. "Welcome home, Elise. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.